Hi, Alex. How you doing?
Hey, yeah, not too bad. I've been listening in today and yeah, really enjoying the contribution so far.
Oh, good, mate.
Thanks, Alex.
Really appreciate that. Thank you so much. You've joined us 6 hours in.
Nice.
We've been at it now, so we're feeling good.
Yeah,
feeling
that's good.
How's
was,
your? Sorry,
yeah,
on
not
you
too
go.
bad. I was speaking to Jay, who I know you've got coming up a little bit later, and he has had a couple of attempts at sort of Guinness World Records, which are all about duration, and it is tough. Like, so I think he'll have some good tips about when you're approaching that sort of point where it gets past a certain milestone. But yeah, really admire what you're doing.
We'll take any single tip that we can get. Alex, I'm going to give you a brief introduction for anyone that is watching. Deputy CEO of the Diana Award, founder of the anti-bullying program, and you're also on the advisory board for the Gates Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Today, nearly. Yeah,
it's 4 o'clock.
I'm off. We had an amazing conversation with Tessie first thing this morning, and we touched on a lot of the bullying conversation that we really want to bring up with you as well. When we were doing some of our research into all the amazing work that you guys are doing, I was sitting opposite Ben, and I was just getting such a big smile on my face when I was working through all of the things that you've done, because I'm like, this is such an important conversation. We need to be having this. So I'm so excited to have you here talking about this today.
Well, no, thanks for having me. And it's great that you're one, doing something that is all about talking about this issue and sort of unearthing some of the stigma around it, and also that they kindly chosen us as as a cause that can raise awareness. And just listening to Ben's story again earlier, and I know you've got a few other people from the Diana Award. It's really, really nice touch to see you choose that and highlight this issue and choose us as one of the partners.
No, like absolutely. We are honored, and when it comes to the work that the Diana Award does, it's universal. There's so many different elements to it. You know, like we've talked, like the nutrition side, the mental health side, the anti-bullying side that we're going to speak to you about. Like, everything just goes hand in hand. So the work that you do links in just so well with these other campaigns, and it's inspiring. So a big thank you. So let's get stuck in. Let's find out a little bit more about you. So a little bit of a background on you, and how did this journey all start for you, Alex?
Yeah, so I mean, for a big part of my story started when I was at school, somewhere that as children we spend 11,000 hours of our life. So, I think it's a huge time. It's a real opportunity, therefore. And for me, I didn't always feel particularly safe or happy. My mental health wasn't necessarily protected at school. I grew up in Milton Keynes, and the schools that I went to, the first one, the primary school, wasn't very diverse. So I was one of a few sort of mixed race students. My dad's black, his side of the family is from Jamaica, and then my mum's side is from Spain. And a couple of students would be quite quite racist and say some quite nasty things about my dad, and that would definitely make me feel like I didn't belong, and affect my self-esteem, and my confidence, my mental health. I can remember going home in tears quite often. And then at secondary school, I was on the receiving end of mostly it was sort of homophobic bullying around sort of at that time my perceived sexuality, because I wasn't necessarily that open with it. And I think those sort of things really just make you question whether you belong, or the part that you can play in the world, and how much you can contribute, not just at the time with things like putting your hand up, but also like whether you will be accepted in future workplaces or university, colleges, and so on. But what it did spur me on, I think, that sort of pain, is to come up with this idea of anti-bullying ambassadors, young people whose job it was to learn how to stand up for themselves and stand up for others. And for that, I received the Diana Award about in 2004, and that's sort of my journey of how I became involved in the Diana Award.
It's amazing, mate. Thank you so much for that intro. And I'd like to, I suppose I'd quite like to go on a journey and unpack, to use Danny's favorite term, to understand a little bit more about your upbringing and in school. Now, one of the questions that we had planned to ask quite a few of the guests was going to be what was your understanding of mental health as a youth? So you obviously, you were on the receiving end of bullying. You potentially, apologies if I misinterpreted this or if I'm just putting two and two together, but potentially at a stage of questioning your sexuality. And this obviously then there was the bullying side as well. What was your understanding then of mental health? Because sometimes to experience grief or be unhappy or sad as a youth, we don't quite understand these emotions. What was your experience of mental health, of even the term mental health as a youth?
Yeah, no, I think we I mean, I don't think it existed in it as a sort of terminology for schools. If you think now schools have to have a member of staff who's uh, trained in mental health and leads on that. I think back then, I don't. I think if I'd used the word mental health, I don't think I think I would have a lot of blank faces looking at me, students and stuff. So I can't remember one time it was talked about, or even when we would talk to understand our emotions, or how our feelings. So I think in that sense it was just a massive hole, and now there is there's it's a big difference, and I think it would have been really interesting actually if we sort of like polled or surveyed young people and teachers back then, and now to see whether young people had heard of the word and had whether their school had discussed it with them as an issue and a priority. But back then, I don't think I had any understanding. I might have called myself in secondary school like a little bit, I think rightly so, depressed at times because of the bullying and because of the impact it was having on my self-esteem. But I would have never kind of understood what it meant to be have good well-being or good mental health. And now things like Ofsted school inspectors, they actively measure and look for some of those indicators, and they expect when they speak to students during inspections and ask them, how does the school help you with your well-being? They expect a good answer. But I think back then, I think when you and I went to school, I just don't think it was something that was really covered or talked about at all. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to bring up the two stats that I brought up when we're speaking to Tessie as well. 55% of us were bullied in
Mm.
school, and 69% of us, of those bullied, would say it negatively impacted their mental health. What's your interpretation of those stats? What do those stats mean to you?
Yeah, and those stats, like we regularly do things with like YouGov where we ask Great British adults whether they were bullied at school, and it is always surprising that sort of over half of the population say they experience bullying. And we also work really hard to define it. So we don't call it unkindness, we call it something that's repetitive, happens more than once, someone going out of their way to make someone feel upset or unsafe or uncomfortable. And then the stats are similar for young people as well. Just under half of young people experience bullying. What we know now that maybe we didn't know back then is that bullying can have a real negative impact on your mental health. And there's a really interesting study by King's College which tracked 10 and 11-year-olds that were exposed to bullying at school all the way up to age 50. And those 50-year-olds now have poorer mental health, lack the ability to trust adults in the workplace because of the experience bullying, and had poorer job prospects. And it's all sort of looking at that idea of those adults that were exposed to bullying who have poorer chances. Because I think if you are made to feel bullied at school where you spend 11,000 hours of your life, you not only can't concentrate, you might not be able to put your hand up, but you also, it affects things like your sleep and your relationships. If you have those at school with friends, at home, with parents, you can become quite sort of moody and upset. And it really is your world, school. And something that I worry about a little bit is that, like, we do talk about the internet being like a real place for bullying, but I still feel like we haven't got a grip on what's happening in our schools, which should be a far easier place to control behavior. And actually, what we know for children, for something like bullying, is that cyberbullying creates very few new victims. And what I mean by that is, for the majority of children, if they're being bullied online, it usually started at school, a familiar relationship, a peer, and then it continued online. It's much rarer for children to be bullied by strangers. I think that's different for adults, because of maybe anonymity potentially, or just like it's a wider network. But the biggest threat that the children face when it comes to bullying is actually face-to-face bullying, and it's in school. It's about every case of a young person being bullied online, 70% of it started at school. And I think we need to sometimes readdress that, because when you hear in the media, when you hear politicians try to blame technology, actually it's an easy solution, really, whereas actually it does come back to behavior and what happens in society. And I had to remind Nadine Dorris, who's sort of the culture and media secretary, that you remember in the World Cup, when a lot of these footballers were receiving racist abuse online, and the majority of it, 98%, because I sit on Twitter's Trust and Safety Council, so in terms of Twitter abuse, 98% of it came from accounts that were not anonymous. So we knew who these people were; they didn't hide their identity. And then pretty much all of it, I think it was like 99%, came from the UK. So to me, that shows that we have a problem with racism, not just on the internet, but like in real life, in society. And a lot of that must start at school at a young age. So I think it's very easy to blame technology, but at the end of the day, there is humans that are choosing to behave that way. And I think we just see the worst of what is in society, in all of us, on the internet. And I don't want politicians to be able to say, oh, we need to fix the internet, when actually they need to invest in mental health. They need to invest in bullying prevention programs in schools and so on, rather than just easily say, oh, it's the internet that is the biggest problem. Yes, we do see some really harmful stuff on there, but I think sometimes we paint it as like this uncontrollable beast, and I don't think that's helpful for like parents who feel like they can't do anything about it, or for young people. Whereas I think there's a lot of solutions or things you can do to solve a lot of the things that happen on the internet.
I think it is so powerful to say that technology isn't the cause, it's more the vehicle for it. It enables these people to send these messages. And that just again highlights the earlier interventions and how important it is to catch that. Because again, it comes back, I can't remember who we were talking to earlier, when we said, bullying started, it's learned behavior, being mean to someone. It's just not, you're not innately born with hatred within you. That's learned behavior, and a lot of it starts either learned behavior at school or learned behavior at home. So you've touched on, you think there are a couple solutions that we can implement as a society to try and change this. Do you mind talking us through a couple that you believe would help us improve in that area?
Yeah, so I do think the first one is around schools. As I mentioned, where we spend 11,000 hours of their life, and I think we don't teach enough around topics like mental health, or internet safety, or how to treat each other. I think every school you'll find will have to have a anti-bullying policy, which is just a piece of paper. What every school doesn't have to do is do things like have students part of the solution, taking responsibility as anti-bullying ambassadors. And I think similarly with mental health, what we're seeing at the moment is the government is asking for and providing training for one lead teacher at every school. And there's a lot of schools, like nearly 30,000 schools, one person in each school to be like a mental health lead, and have something called mental health first aid training, or now they're doing like senior mental health training. But that's still not really enough, and I think the government will say, well, we have things like the PHSE curriculum around relationships, and that covers things like well-being and so on. Or there's the computing curriculum, where if you have ICT lessons, then you will cover at some point like what to do to keep yourself safe. But I think the problem is it's not really being embedded and it's not something that every school has to do, and it also relies on educators and teachers knowing some of this stuff. Even I don't know everything that's happening on the internet. And at the moment, if you look at, like, I think the top 5 apps, for the first time ever, there's been like no Meta Facebook group app in the most popular downloads. So no WhatsApp, no Instagram, and instead it's things like Be Real, which is kind of anti sort of Instagram, and more about only being able to take one picture a day and more natural, and a few other kind of new players. So it's quite hard to keep up. But I think one of the solutions is actually instructing schools to have more of a sort of uniformed model and approach to how to tackle some of these issues. This government is very hands off. I mean, we work very closely with them, but they are quite hands off, and they don't want to tell schools how to deal with these issues. And I think that's all well and good, but it means there's inconsistencies. So I think starting early with early years education is very important. And then I think maybe more simple one just around the sort of internet safety is we've got something going through Parliament now, which is a bill that will probably take place. Well, hopefully will be put into action fairly soon, about regulating social media companies. But I think one thing that's been missed a little bit is the fact that the internet is global, and there'd be a much stronger approach if we worked with lots of different governments, because I think what's going to happen with this bill is it's just not going to satisfy enough people. And one thing we can only do really is maybe make moderation a bit more efficient, but I don't think it's as easy as how things are classified or labeled with like COVID information. So everyone always says to me, well, if the companies are able to identify what is COVID information with that label, why can't they do that with other issues? Well, the fact is that for something like racism, I might be using a racist word to raise awareness of my experience, or I might be using it to speak to somebody I know. If we just slap a label on it or one size fits all approach, that's just not going to work with solving an issue that's as complex as behavior and racism. So AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning just isn't quite there yet to deal with the volume. And the last thing I'll just say on this actually is that there was this really interesting study that looked at like a platform with say 1 billion users, so say take TikTok, and if those billion users post one piece of content every day, even if moderation was 99% effective, it would still leave like 1 million, I think it's 1 million, well, yeah, 1 million posts every day left up, which were missed actually. So I think we're always going to have that problem of scale, and trying to efficiently deal with some of these things. So I think there's a lot of work. Like, I don't think internet regulation and the law is just going to solve some of the problems that, again, are happening offline in real life in society that they're deep rooted and probably need addressing, starting hopefully with schools.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because it's treating it from the root cause. And yeah, of course, we can look how things are monitored online, but ultimately it's about educating the people that are going to be posting these comments in the first place. What constitutes as bullying? So there might be some parents listening to this or tuning in live right now that might think, right, when I asked Tessie a question earlier of what signs to look out for, but the question I want to ask you is, what then actually constitutes as, I'd say, maybe like in-person bullying and then online bullying? What things should parents be looking out for?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's really important that we don't label everything as bullying, because I do think there's a difference between perhaps something that's unkind versus something that's harmful. And I think we're all going to come across in life comments or opinions that are not very nice, but that hopefully we've got the resilience in us to sort of brush them off, and we are really clear on that, because we don't want everything labeled as bullying. So I think it does come back to the idea of bullying saying being repetitive and more than once. And I think in person, the biggest sort of types of bullying that we hear young people particularly tell us is that sort of verbal bullying. It's mostly comments about if you have a protected characteristic, so perhaps your race or your religion, or perhaps your gender or sexuality. And I think that means it could be racist, it could be homophobic, it could be one of those sort of types of things. And for the majority of young people, it does seem to be verbal bullying that they hear the most face to face. I think physical fights, although that's how we like to characterize sort of bullying as happening, I think often it's verbal for children and young people, the research tends to suggest. And then I think cyberbullying is any sort of technology or device that's being used to harass somebody, and that's usually malicious. And I think, again, it's important that we define bullying as cyberbullying or online bullying. Actually, a lot of young people were telling me the other day, like, stop using the word cyber because it sounds so old fashioned. And I think that's true, right? Like, cyber, yeah, it's just,
So
I don't
overlooked,
know.
Alex.
Yeah. And so yeah, that I think with that, it is about people using technology to abuse or harass someone. And we see the biggest type of actually online bullying that we see, that young people tell us affects them the most, is that sort of accusations or spreading of rumor or gossip. Like, I think online bullying can have that kind of extra platform and audience that maybe face-to-face bullying has got more contained, and things can spread a lot quicker. And a lot of young people sort of talk to us about how these allegations or accusations or completely incorrect rumors are spread about them. And then it comes down to second things, is sort of comments about people's appearance on social media. So I would say that with online bullying, it can feel, obviously it's got that 24/7 nature that doesn't happen. And when you hopefully leave this, when you leave the school gates, you leave school bullying behind. But of course now it can be 24/7, and it's often a lot more sort of public in nature. I think the signs, yeah, are, if you trust your instinct as a parent, if you notice a change in behavior, it could be more engaged on the internet or less engaged, or it could be losing contact with some friends that you usually see your child socialize with, or perhaps they've become particularly sort of angry or upset. Then I think there are those basic things that you can do about asking them, you know, how they are, like, not try and take over the problem. Because I think when I was at school, the biggest thing I worried about is if I told my mum, she would make the problem worse. So I think you want to actually ask the question of, if you think your child's being bullied, or what can we do about this together to solve the problem, or what do you want me to do about it, sort of thing, so that you're giving some of that sense of ownership and control and power back to that young person. And then thinking of solutions together and listening, not becoming angry, and not trying to contact the parents, if you know them, of the person doing the bullying on social media, by Facebook message or something like that. And I think working with the school quite often, like, schools actually have a responsibility. It's the one piece of advice that the government does give schools, that if there's an incident between two pupils, then the school has a duty of care to resolve cyberbullying incidents. So I think work with the school, don't presume that they know about what's going on, and give them that time to sort of solve some of the what's taking place, because they may well not know. And schools are busy places, and teachers who have like 30 people in a class, if it is going on in the classroom, won't always notice everything, and they certainly won't know what's going on technology and social media. So I think, yeah, definitely working with the school, but most importantly working with your child, so that you together help them feel like they're still in control of the situation that they feel quite helpless about currently.
So you were, apologies. So you were the victim of bullying in school.
Mhm.
Tell everyone then what happened next. What came of that when it comes to the ambassador?
Yeah, so I was a little bit cheeky and gave myself a job, which I didn't interview for. So I just at school called myself student anti-bullying coordinator, and my head teacher was a little bit like, "Where did this job come from?" Um, and I also had a quite hard job of convincing him that bullying existed. So I don't think it's so much a problem now, but a lot of head teachers used to say, "Oh, we don't have bullying in our school. It's it's really good school, safe school. We have zero tolerance. Now, actually, what we know is that where there are humans, where there are children, there's definitely bullying, and I think that's more acknowledged now. But I had quite a hard job, and I don't know if you remember, like, form time, tutor time. Like, I managed to convince all the form tutors to well, actually, I didn't convince them. I just put in the registers, which you used to like have in afternoon, a load of surveys, and they just handed them out. And these surveys were like bullying surveys, and then I had like 1,000 responses of terrible stories, really, of what was going on in the school. But that was great. I had that sort of data, and then my head teacher made a bit of mistake. He invited me to the governor's sort of board meeting just to talk about what I'm doing as student anti-bullying coordinator. I think because he thought I was, he was quite proud of that. But what he didn't do is he didn't ask me what I was going to say. So I just came with like all the responses from these surveys, and it was a bit shocking. But once I got past that point, they did understand the issue was really important, and I created a little team of student anti-bullying ambassadors and kind of made them really mini celebrities in their school. So they had responsibility, they were known, they presented assemblies, we did like patrols, but they weren't like patrols like that around the playground. They were more just like being friendly and asking people how their day is, like what their favorite subject is, favorite teacher. So it became kind of important that, or known that, it was good to be kind and be positive. And we created drop-in sessions where people could come and speak about if they're being affected by bullying. And that was while I was studying for my A levels, and it became very successful. Other schools started finding out about it from some press, and we spent a bit of time spreading it around. And I won a bit of work. I won a competition with MTV, which was like a grand idea to make your mark, and you could win a grand, and they gave me some money for my idea of this anti-bullying campaign, which was celebrities just standing up against bullying. Well, actually started in a school, and just different members of society taking a stand. And from that, it sort of spread, and the government heard about it, and I was invited in to talk about the program, and I brought the Diana Award in with some young people, and then we had the opportunity to pitch for some money together. And long story short, like, we've now got that sort of 40,000 young people over the past sort of 10 years that have been trained, and companies like Facebook fund the program for any secondary school that want it in the UK. They get it for free, the program. And in primary schools, Nationwide Building Society fund it. So it's really big, and we've got a great team. And I hope that what happens through the training and the program does shape attitudes and change behaviors. And I'm really sort of hopeful that in future years we'll have sort of more compassionate leaders and politicians who know how to treat each other. Because let's face it, like, just in the last couple of weeks, Parliament has been exposed for a lot of allegations around bullying and harassment, and so on. So there's still a lot of work needing to be done, but I think the future is the exciting thing, the future generations, because just like you're showing now, like, I think people know that these things are important, whereas our parents and grandparents, certainly when I speak to them about some of these issues, they just brush them off or think that it was a normal part of life. And I've had a couple of my conversations with my grandma during lockdown, and she's in her 90s, and when her understanding of perhaps things like around harassment and so on was just that that's what you face, and it's normal. And I think slowly those attitudes are changing. Certainly people know that bullying isn't character building, and they know that mental health happens, but actually there are things we can do to prevent it and talk about it and make it more open. And I think it's just a very different generation society, which is good.
I think that's just so powerful and well done, and setting up such an incredible, successful project. I mean, 40,000 is just amazing. Wow. And again, it just highlights the scale and extent of the problem. If there are that many people that are putting their hand up and saying, I'm willing to be an anti-bullying ambassador, even though you might not have the actual tangible data to say how much bullying actually goes on in some places, it's hard to deny that it isn't happening if there's that many people willing to volunteer and donate their time while they're at school to campaign for such a thing. I just think it's absolutely brilliant. I did have a question. I just lost my place. How do you think you see the campaign growing even more? I've heard you've went global now with it as well. What's the future of the anti-bullying movement that you've started, do you think?
Yeah, I think ultimately with issues, you do. I think if you're a good charity or enterprise, you do kind of want to solve them, and you want to put yourself out of business. Now, I
Mm,
think that's difficult for something like bullying because we know it's always going to exist, sadly. But I would like to sort of not be needed anymore in the sense that there's a couple of things like if the government said every school needs to have a student anti-bullying campaign, um, and I would love for us to have the program which is translated and maybe into the top 100 languages in the world, and everything's online that's freely available, and that it spreads in that way. I would be really happy, I think, and think that's a job done. At the moment, we're in about nearly 5,000 schools, but there's like 30,000 schools across the UK. So still a long way. But I think it probably is going to be government, the sort of next target around helping the government understand why they could do more in this area, even around things like recording and understanding, to your point, the level of bullying that takes place, to actually making sure the student population is part of changing what we know is a big issue. So I think those things would be probably a big focus.
yeah, definitely. And I think, like you just touched on, it's really important that more schools sign up to be a part of this. And I think my next question from that would be if there's anyone that's tuning into this just now and has children at school and their school isn't part of the program, is there a way that they can get their school to maybe enroll in the program? What would that look like if somebody's wanting that to happen for
Yeah.
their children?
Yeah, absolutely. And the only way we can actually spread this is by schools wanting to be part of it. So yeah, if you go to diana-award.org.uk or antibullyingpro.com, you can find all the information, and schools can register their interest. We do need the schools to sort of be the ones that say we want you to come in, or we want to host a training event. But it is free. There's no cost to any secondary school or any primary school across the UK. So we'd really recommend schools being aware of it, and parents can play a big part in helping their schools understand the possibility of being able to be part of something like this.
What's what stumbling blocks are there? Like, what hurdles are there? Because, like you've said, the way that you've just explained that so simply, Alex, right? Like, right, if you want to do it, why don't we get you go speak to your school,
Mm.
tell them about it. It's free, right? And this is not to then downplay the amount of schools that you are
Yeah.
in already, because it's absolutely incredible. But why are some schools still not taking notice yet? Are some schools still turning a blind eye? Is it still?
Mm.
I would hope that it's not still this perception that it's character building, and
Mm.
it's not as a big deal as it is. What's your take on that? What sort of issues are you being faced when it comes to the global
Yeah.
rollout?
Yeah, I mean, I think even one of the challenges in the UK is around funding, and we've got a team, but and actually, like maybe like two trainers can work with maybe 300 schools directly a year, in the way we do the training model. But that still limits like our reach, and I think that is the number one thing. The government, England fund our schools work. Some of our schools work, so that's one part, and then we have other organizations like Facebook and Instagram and Nationwide Building Society that fund some more reach, but that definitely does prevent the reach. During the pandemic, we've done more stuff online, but it's still, still there's only so much the team could do. And then I think it is some schools think they've got a really good handle on the issue. They don't think they need to do anything else. But that, I think the evidence would suggest otherwise. And then part of it is that's just that awareness. I think that it's with schools and charities, it's a very crowded space, and we are still, I would describe ourselves sort of small charity. We've got a big name, but we're a small charity, and the brand, we're still doing a lot around sort of awareness of the brand. Things like this really help. So I think that can be one of the barriers, but the biggest one that that could be solved is if government were more willing to tell schools what they could be doing, because they really are hands off. Like while they'll to an extent like do some tweets about our program and the many other wonderful initiatives that they fund, the Conservative government has decided they want to be quite hands off and not tell schools what they have to do. So even things that they do fund, they don't necessarily really push. And also schools have so many things. Like at the moment, it was just announced this week around more mental health funding for senior leads at teachers. So schools have a lot of things to do, not least like the curriculum and then mental health training and so on, that it is hard for them to prioritize and I think fit in everything. But yeah, more awareness would be great for us and more funding, I think.
I'd love to turn the conversation to bullying in adults, because we've spoken a lot about the younger generation and where we can have these earlier interventions, and asked you what the kind of the characteristics of bullying in youths and at school. Bullying is present in adults. Probably the most common place, I would imagine, would be in the workplace. Do you have any advice for anyone on that? Because a lot of the time, I think when it's in the workplace, a lot of people feel like their hands are tied. They maybe feel like they can't go speak to the boss about it. Maybe they feel it's their boss that's doing the bullying. Do you have any insights or any advice on this?
Yeah, I think it can be really, really tough, because as you say, there's that kind of imbalance of power, which we often know exists with bullying, particularly when it perhaps is someone who is your line manager or more senior. I think a really good thing to do is to check with a colleague or just a friend, like run past what is happening to you and get their insight on it, and just to check, like, is it 100% bullying or is it sort of professional criticism or performance management, understanding the difference of that. And I think then if you do think it is, then perhaps having a conversation with a colleague or HR manager, if you sort of feel that you trust them. But I would. It's easier for me now, I think, because I'm in a senior position. But I think I would want to try and address it with the person. And I think the sooner you can address it, the better, because that person may not know exactly how what they're doing is affecting you. Particularly if they're line managing you, there's probably a way to, within performance reviews, sort of talk about how you think we work together, and what could actually be done to strengthen our sort of working relationship. I think there might be some more sort of subtle earlier ways to address it. But ultimately, if you are finding that someone is really bullying you and harassing you, then I think make sure you read your organizational policy. So every workplace will have a bullying and harassment policy. It should contain some really good information about the steps that they say that the employer said that they will take if bullying occurs. Trying to look at those, thinking about what your plan of action might be. I always think face to face, having a conversation with someone about what's going on is better than putting in an email, which might be lost in translation in some way, or cause a few problems. But I think you should not. We spend 11,000 hours of our life at school, but in total you spend something like 90,000 hours of your life at work. So I think it's not worth one of those hours you feeling like what's occurring is making you miserable ultimately. So it is worth addressing, and thinking about making sure you go into that conversation knowing what the policy is, knowing what your rights are. You can contact like a trade union if you're part of that. A lot of workplaces, organizations have employee assistant sort of helplines and programs where you can call up for confidential anonymous advice. You may well have groups that exist within your organization, committees around things like equality or diversity or bullying, harassment. Worth speaking to those, and go in and address it, because ultimately, it's not worth suffering in silence. And the employer does have a duty of care to you, and there are options around sort of tribunals and all sorts, but I think trying to sort it out before then. And I think the moment you notice someone's behavior not being right, then have a conversation with them about how that made you feel. And I just wanted to let you know that the way that came across in the meeting, you may not have meant it, but actually didn't make me feel great about the contribution that I made. Address it there and then, and then you've got a record of that. And hopefully you can nip things in the bud before they get more serious. But definitely speak out. I think with all these issues, whether it's sort of mental health or bullying, you've got to speak out, and trust your instincts, and don't put up with it, basically.
Alex, what would your advice be for somebody who wants to speak out and knows that it will definitely be a good thing if they do, but just struggle getting the words out? They see it as a really big uphill battle, because I'm sure you can relate. There's people out there who they know by confronting the problem head on might yield a good result, but actually articulating it and verbalizing the problem just seems like a massive obstacle to them.
Yeah, and I actually I know Ben West has spoken a couple of times about how he has difficult conversations, and he sort of says he practices in the mirror. I think like practice on a friend, like what you really want to say, and see how it comes across. I think now technology can be really helpful as well, because you can like record a voice note, you can record yourself trying to say what you want to say, and then reflect on it. But I think also, I said like it's better to try and do it face to face. Like a letter isn't bad. I think like letters or emails aren't great if you do them in the moment and you want to send them straight away, because I think you need a chance to reflect on it, and you want to come back to it to make sure you're happy. But I think ultimately any sort of means of you getting to the point where you feel like you've articulated what's happening to you well, it's worth it. But I do find things like practicing with a friend about what might be the response and how you deal with that can help you feel so much more confident going into situation. And hopefully you'll have like a colleague at work or a friend who you could trust, and you could share the experience and then practice with on it. I think is almost my sort of top tips.
Class.
Answer the question.
Yeah, perfectly.
No, that was brilliant. We've got a question as well from Tess. Tess said, really, really, really interesting question. Actually, I'd love to know the answer to this. How should parents deal with it if they suspect their child is the bully? I know I would be mortified if my kids bullied someone else, but it would be good to know how best to deal with it, other than just the obvious of punishing them.
Yeah. Do this question is really interesting, because I think often parents say like it's probably worse than if they found out that a child was being bullied in some way, because thinking about I think the parents take it quite personally. Think, oh, I didn't bring my child up to treat someone else like this. But I think what we've got to remember is, and it's the same with adults as well, is that we do all make mistakes. And I think what I hear quite often with sort of children involved in bullying incidents, that it may have been something that happened on WhatsApp, or they may have not quite realized. And once they were spoken to, like they did have that opportunity to change their behavior. I think labels are terrible, and like you never want to label sort of a child as a bully. We try not to use that word. I mean, we don't actually use the word bully. We use like bullying behavior because it's the behavior, it's not the child or the adult, and we can all change that. And I think just linked to that, I'm really not a fan of sort of cancel culture as well, because I think a lot of the things that we did years ago, even if it was a couple of years ago, doesn't mean that we're the same person now. And I think as long as you're not repeating those mistakes, all of us should be allowed that sort of growth. So I think with a child as well, when you hear that perhaps a child has been involved in bullying, it's important to actually remain calm and react in a similar way as if you found out they were being bullied, because they may well be a victim in some way. You know, maybe it happened to them. Maybe they just don't quite understand why their behavior is not acceptable. So I think you remain calm. You find out the facts. You listen to them. You find out why they chose to do what they did, and then you give them that sort of support and lesson in understanding why what their behavior the behavior that they did is wrong. And yeah, there probably will be a consequence to the behavior, and I think you can be reasonable in that. But the whole point is that if it was a one-off, or if it was an incident, then don't presume that means they're going to continue that behavior. If you remain calm and you help them address what they did, and whether that's an apology or making amends, then I think you can be confident that you can move on and think, well, my child's learned a really valuable lesson, and hopefully they won't do that again. But I think it's the same sort of approach. If you found out they were being bullied, like asking them questions, what happened, why, and then helping them explore why that wasn't the correct way to deal with that situation. Because let's face it, adults still make a lot of mistakes online, in person, and we all need that space to have some real sort of growth, to be able to understand why we could have handled that situation better. And at the end of the day, they might be able to better understand triggers, things that made them angry in that moment or made them do what they did. Or you may find out that they were also being bullied or made to feel unsafe. There's lots of reasons, but I think it's really important that when parents find out something like that, they don't get really angry really quickly, and instead they're sort of calm and patient and find out the facts and support their child to make the right decisions the next time.
Yeah, this is absolutely brilliant. And I think every single answer you've given just so much depth and understanding there that I think this is going to really have given everyone listening, and myself included, a massive education here. We're probably going to wrap up in about 10 minutes or so. So I just want to pass over to the boys to see whether there was anything in particular that Alex touched on earlier that either of you want to cover.
I think I'd like to ask a question about your work as an advisory board member on the Gates Foundation, if that's okay. So I believe you've been working on the Goalkeepers Initiative to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. And for anyone listening, that's 17 global goals, which were agreed in 2015 by 139 world leaders to achieve by 2030. Some of the headline ones are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, and so on and so forth. I'll not list them all out. However, I'd be interested to see where that work has taken you, Alex, involved in that, what that's been like, and obviously with these to be achieved by 2030, we're 2022 just now. Do you think that we've still got a way to go, or has there been really good progress been done against these goals so far?
Yeah, absolutely. And a big part of this sort of Goalkeepers Initiative is the idea that it's going to be future generations to come up with the solutions to make sure we hit this target, and that the world is a safer, cleaner, more equitable place. And goal 3 is good well-being and health, and covers things like mental health. I think what we know is that sadly the pandemic, it actually, I think in just 20 weeks at the start of the pandemic, it set us back across all the goals by 20 years. That's how much progress was affected. I think we made more of a recovery, but part of the work is every year in Global Goals Week, which is in the 3rd week of September, we release a report which sort of looks at the progress that's been made. These goals and targets rely on governments all signing up to the global goals, which most of them then did, and then providing evidence of how they're making progress. And there have been some real success in achieving or making some progress. But I think on a couple of big areas, probably things around equality, gender equality, well-being and health, climate, environment, we're still behind on the commitments and pledges that world leaders all made. Surely, I think it was sort of around the millennium, as part of something that was the Millennium Development Goals and then became the global goals. So we still need a lot of progress around that. My job has been to try and help find young people, particularly across Europe, that are doing great work to advance these and have got solutions around various things, from things like sanitation or health and disease, or solutions, and I think that is probably the most exciting thing and the most sort of promising, that there are lots of people out there, individuals, organizations, companies, governments as well, who are making a lot of progress on this. But it is going to rely on a lot of people coming together for us to meet that target, because we're not there yet, and it's not looking that promising. But it's an exciting initiative that both Bill Gates and Melinda have been a big part of chairing and spearheading, and it's been great to work with them on that. And actually, Bill Gates was in London last week and got a chance to meet him and again talk to him about a book that he's got out around the pandemic. But it was also very interesting, like talking to him about the sort of conspiracy theories and the misinformation stuff that is out there about Bill Gates. I'm sure I won't need to remind people of some of that stuff, but it was very interesting listening to him, being very sort of calm and humorous around the idea that he in his own words, sitting in this layer, being able to see where we all are at a certain time. Anyway, I've got to be careful that we don't get taken down the stream for misinformation, but he really addressed some of those things, and he's investing a lot in projects and that help advance the global goals. But yeah, I think we've still got a lot of work to do, and Global Goals Week is in September, when you'll probably see a lot more activity. But without a doubt, the pandemic has set back a lot of things. I think we can see that here in the UK with things like waiting times for hospital appointments, or even mental health prevention, so on. It's become a lot more difficult because there's catch up. So we need to try and make sure that we're doing a good job, but also sometimes we forget how lucky we are in the UK with sort of quality of life compared to some areas in the world where it's just not at all equity, and you can see that with like vaccines. We're really fortunate here, but in some countries they just haven't had that, so there's still lots of work that needs to be done.
I would love to know, did you see Bill Gates and ask that question? Did you bring that up in conversation?
What, around the
yeah, it's just
yeah. No, I did. I thought, yeah. And he said,
I've got one chance with Bill
that
Gates.
would have been that would have been my final question as well. I was going to, what did he say?
Yeah. Well, it's his daughter that sends him most of the conspiracies that are on the internet, and like that, he sort of finds out through her. But I think he just laughs at them, and he addressed the idea that he's a lot richer and he's done really well from the pandemic, and the other one where they said that he planned it, where I think there's that famous, he did this TED talk where that piece where he's talking about how ill prepared we were for it, which is part of the foundation's work for years around disease and the response. People sort of said because he mentioned that he knew all about it, so he was very calm and humorous about it. And then I also wanted to, because I think it linked to sort of technology misinformation, I wanted to ask him about Elon Musk, and I did, because Elon Musk was a bit nasty to Bill Gates on Twitter. I think because they didn't invest in like the sort of green Tesla sort of energy part a while ago, and I thought, I'm going to give it's just sort of private conversation with a couple of us. I'm going to give Bill the chance to sort of criticize Elon Musk, but he didn't. He was actually there complimentary. He was like, don't rule Elon Musk out. and that maybe actually, he said he's a really clever, smart guy, and he may well, with something like Twitter, do good in the sense that he might help clear up misinformation on the platform, and he said to not sort of rule him out. But yeah, it was a really great sort of a relaxed conversation, and I was impressed with Bill's answers. And the main part of his book is that he thinks we need this sort of global task force to make sure, a bit like he compares us to like firefighters that put out a fire. He thinks there needs to be an international, he calls it germ task force, which I've forgotten exactly what it stands for, but that can help deal with future pandemics. And he says, because there isn't that, everyone thinks the World Health Organization is there for that, but actually they're not, sort of thing. So a big part of his book is looking at the lessons learned. And it was, it was fascinating to think about it. But he put on this exhibit as well, as part of the book launch, and we walked through. And when you just think about some of the sort of where we were in the world, with just a lack of basic equipment for our sort of our frontline doctors and nurses and so on, and the lessons learned, it was a real sort of walk back in history, and just which wasn't there many years ago. But I think the work that he does and other philanthropists is really inspiring, and we need more people really to do that sort of work, and bring together groups like Goalkeepers, who are just a sort of amazing people that have got some really innovative solutions to lots of different problems across the world. And we need more working across the world, because otherwise we tend to have sort of governments and people championing their own approach, but not embracing what else is also taking place across the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's the perfect way to wrap that up. I think everything that you have done is absolutely incredible, from starting out when you were at school, developing this campaign, and actually having the courage, like I said, the foresight to create something, but then the courage to see it through. It might not have seemed like courage to you at the time. Maybe it just seemed as obvious, right? I need to do this, but it definitely is from our standpoint. And I've just got a smile on my face sitting thinking about you at school, like coming up with that, not having any idea of where it was going to go, adopting the name, being invited to these board meetings, and just and then seeing where it's went from them. And I think it just goes to show, when you are just truly passionate about something, it's going to work in your favor. And honestly, full credit to absolutely everything that you're doing. And yeah, incredible work, and we're so proud to be supporting it with the Diana Foundation today.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for the support. And I know you've got a long way to go yet in terms of time and guests. Yeah, I'm going to continue to tune in. And thanks for the support and the awareness, and for just doing this as well. You know, for knowing that this is something you want to do, and not necessarily knowing, exactly how it will work. I think that's something that I wish I sort of, when I was younger, I did a lot more of that sort of stuff. And I think we've got to be brave, be bold, and sort of take those opportunities to see what comes of certain ventures and so on. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it so far, and looking forward to the rest of it.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Alex. It's been
Thank
an
you so
absolute
much.
privilege having you on. And I've been fascinated by this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, me too.
Brilliant. Speak to you soon.
Cheers, Alex.
Cheers, Alex.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye now.
Cheers.